Welcome back. You're listening to the Sting of Mortality, Chapter 4. A stack of coffins. LeClove couldn't remember a day when he felt more exhausted. The comforting weight of the sword brought him courage and the strength he needed to press on. When he saw the sun rising like a giant glowworm slithering across the horizon, he stiffly rose to his feet and continued down the shoreline. Several miles further down the coast, the Clove could make out a small harbor town. The fishing boats were setting out to catch the morning tide. As he drew closer, the local people seemed to be in a big hurry to get to their business. In fact, they didn't so much as make eye contact with him at all. Not even an unsettling stare that is usually reserved for a rough-looking, tattered stranger. They moved about in an uncanny, silent haste. "Morning," LeClove said. The man looked up at the sun and then went on his way. Yes, it is," LeClove mumbled to himself. Then he stopped and paused when he saw the rows of newly constructed wooden caskets. The weary traveler was familiar to the cycle of life and death, but he couldn't help notice the abnormally large quantity. It made him uneasy and sobered him quickly. The Clove turned to a run-down, musty tavern. The doors were stiffed open. The rusted hinges whined and the floorboards groaned under his feet. The tavern was dark, and it was covered with the stench of mold, mildew, mixed with beer. Is the water free?" "If you're buying food with it," the bartender replied irritatedly. LeClove let out an agitated growl as he pulled out a few shells from his left pocket and tossed them onto the counter. Some decent places a traveler's story would be worth at least a drink of water. And if the story was especially good, maybe a meal, he remarked. The greasy-faced bartender glanced down at the shells skeptically and leaned over to spit in a tarnished bronze spittoon. "We don't like drifters around here, especially ones that don't have any money." "What's wrong with my money?" he demanded. The bartender glanced down at the shells and then at the yellow-eyed savage. "We don't accept wampum, you yellow-eyed fleabag!" He scowled and suddenly became silent when he saw the very distinct sword hilt at the stranger's hip, and his tone quickly changed. But a good story is always worth a meal, of course," he added. "We have a soup on the stove. What will you have to drink?" he asked hurriedly. "Water," LeClove grunted as he sat down on the bar stool. "I take it you aren't a big drinker," commented the bartender. LeClove paused and glanced down at the mug of water, clearly perplexed by the unusual question. He had just ordered something to drink, after all. "I'm from out of town," he replied. "Ah." The bartender blinked and gave the peculiar stranger an uneasy glance. "I guessed that," he said as he set down the wooden cup of water on the counter. The Clove grunted as he slammed the empty wooden cup down and gestured for a refill. "At your rate, you'll drink us dry." The bartender laughed nervously as he refilled the cup. "Why? Has there been a drought, or is there a problem with your well?" he asked. Again, the bartender gave the stranger a sideways glance before turning away to get the soup from the kitchen. The clove's stomach growled noisily as he caught the aroma of steaming, white, creamy fish soup. As soon as the bowl hit the table, the clove seized a large wooden spoon and began shoveling mouthfuls of soup into his mouth. As much as he had been starving, he quickly found that his stomach had shrunk and slowed down to keep from getting sick. You lose your appetite, or is the soup not to your liking?" asked the bartender nervously. The clove paused and glanced at the thin, greasy man for a moment. "I saw a lot of coffins out front. What happened?" he asked. Right away, every patron in the tavern stopped in mid-smoke, mid-drink, mid-card shuffle, and in mid-conversation. The whole tavern had become still. The only sound made was the buzzing of flies. The bartender glanced downward toward the floor, and his face grew pale, and he swallowed hard. "Oh, the vampires," he said quietly, and then quickly poured himself a shot of whiskey and knocked it back. The clove frowned. "Don't you have a night watch?" he asked curiously. The bartender gave an indifferent shrug. "They were all dead in the morning," he said weakly. "So, do you, work for the Fey Leon?" The clove's eyes narrowed. "Do I look like an elf to you?" The bartender paused for a moment, not sure how to answer. The stranger lifted his head, and his glowing yellow eyes glared up at him angrily. The bartender quickly shook his head back and forth dumbly. "Absolutely not. I was just asking. I mean, some people have talked about perhaps requesting elven assistance to make peaceful negotiations with the vampires. But I told them it was a bad idea. I did. I'll give you the names if that's what you're after. But me and mine never wanted anything to do with it," he insisted. The clove arched his brow and gave the man a sideways glance. That's a shame." The bartender blinked and itched the scruff of his neck. His eyes drifted back toward the clove's sword hilt, and large beads of sweat began to form on his forehead. "Oh, please, mister, please, I don't want any trouble. Please tell me what I should do. I'll do anything," he pleaded. The clove rubbed his forehead and his heavy eyelids. "Kill the bloody things until they're tired of dying," he responded, and then laughed hardly at his own joke. The man behind the counter coughed and stared at the drifter as if he had just sprouted a second head. You mean fight them?" he gasped, and fearfully glanced around before lowering his voice in a trembling whisper and leaned forward so that the clove could smell the stench of hard liquor on his breath. "You know that they can't be killed," he exclaimed. The clove couldn't help but grin mischievously. He was tired, fat, and happy, and energetic all at the same time. "I know," he grinned and swayed backwards as sober as could be. Once the cup was empty, he slammed it down on the counter and walked out the door. Outside, the clove's ears pricked up when the familiar sound of a blacksmith's hammer caught his ear. He turned to see a smithy returning the piece of metal back to the forge, and his apprentice, a scrawny young boy about 9 years old, was hopping up and down, dangling from a long cord, working the bellows to blow air into the hot coals. "Faster! I can't work the metal if the forge isn't hot. And if I can't work, you don't eat. And if you don't eat, you'll die. And when you're dead, then what will you do after that?" he demanded. "I don't know, sir," the boy gasped. "Ha ha! Neither do I," he laughed. Obviously, the entire bluster had been in good humor. Leclove stood at a distance, doing his best not to laugh as the boy bobbed his head, grinning. But when the smith turned, Leclove quickly stepped in and took control. He pulled the bright red metal from the roaring fire, acquired a hammer left by the anvil, and began shaping the metal into form. When the smithy turned, he looked toward the boy, who gave a worried, "I don't know," shrug with his shoulders. "Hey, what are you doing?" demanded the smith. Leclove turned, flashing a big smile. He thrust the red hook into his face. The surprised smith jumped back, evading the glowing red metal. "It's a coat hook," Leclove announced proudly. "I don't want a coat hook," the smith exploded angrily. "Oh, how about a hunting knife?" Leclove suggested, over the furious ringing of the hammer. "I don't want a..." The large, heavy-set man fell silent and stroked his large, scruffy beard thoughtfully. "I wasn't making a hunting knife. I was just making a door handle," the flustered smith exclaimed. "A door handle? Oh, those are easy." "Quit fooling around before I call..." "Well, you really know how to swing a hammer." The Clove gave an appreciative nod and was about to leave when the smithy called back out to him. "Care to stick around?" the smithy inquired, and then glared at the boy who was standing idly by. "I could use some good help," he said loudly. The young apprentice gulped and jumped back to heating the forge. The heavy copper coins felt good in his hands. Leclove grinned and nodded his head. "I would, sir," he said quickly. "My name is Lufus. Lufus Smith." "I am Leclove," he answered, returning the solid handshake. "Good. Find a place to settle down and come back early in the morning," he ordered, and then went back to what had been doing originally. With real money in his pocket, Leclove glanced around. He was hungry again, and quickly caught the smell of something delicious. It was only a matter of time before Leclove rounded the corner and found the bakery. On display were large garlic breads, herbal breads, honey breads, cheese breads, round breads, long breads. A fat man appeared. His hands and face were caked with flour. "What do you want?" he asked politely. "Some bread," Leclove said, laughing gently. What else could he be looking for in a bakery, he wondered. "I hope you intend on paying for it," the baker said in a cool, arrogant tone. Leclove would have cut the fat man down in seconds, but his sharp yellow eyes were quick to notice the loaded crossbow on the counter. You don't need that," he assured him. "You don't need that either," replied the baker, gesturing to Leclove's sword. "Hang it on the coat rack by the door," he commanded. Leclove begrudgingly hung up his sword, and in an act of good faith moved away from it. But the baker didn't lower his. "You could set that down," Leclove suggested. "I could do that," the baker agreed. "And you could just walk away with all my bread. And being a pyro, you'd probably figure out a way to do just that. And get away with it, too." The baker scowled, began muttering under his breath. Leclove laughed knowingly. That would most certainly describe the nature of some of his kin that had flown out before him. A Clove picked up a hot loaf of cheese bread and set it on the counter. "I'd like 2 coppers worth," he announced cheerfully. The baker nodded. He set down the crossbow and cut the loaf in half. The Clove smiled, set the coppers down, and took the bread remaining. After retrieving his sword, he left the bakery, and while he ate his cheese bread, he wondered when the baker would notice his crossbow wasn't loaded anymore as he scratched his back with the bolt he had taken and pondered on what to do next. He needed to get some sleep, but after dealing with the vampire on the beach last night, he really didn't like the idea of staying outside, so he rented out a cheap room at the inn for the night. The next day, he awoke well rested and ready to work. Working for Lufus was pleasant and very rewarding. In less than 2 weeks, the Clove replaced his tattered rags with new clothes and a decent pair of boots. He even upgraded to an apartment room with a window. After a usual long day of hard labor, the Clove went to the tavern for dinner. But as he walked through the town, he noticed that the shops were closing. It was then he noticed that the shops were closing earlier than usual. The windows were boarded up, as if everyone were locking down for a big storm. But there wasn't a cloud in the sky, or any wind for that matter. He found the tavern's windows had also been boarded up, but thankfully it had not closed its doors. It had the special as usual, and as always, it was fish stew. The Clove attempted to ask the tavern maid what was going on, but she didn't answer him and went out of her way to avoid eye contact. Everyone was acting strange. He noted that the tavern was unusually brightly lit. An uncommonly large amount of customers sat around the bar, downing vast quantities of rum and taking long puffs from their pipes while their eyes twitched nervously. A harp could have been played on the tight strings of tension in the tavern. No one said a word. No one got up to leave, not even as dusk fell. And then, outside, there was a shrill, shrieking scream that rang throughout the town, a woman's scream that penetrated the boarded windows and rattled the walls. Chapter 5. In the Dark. You have been listening to The Sting of Mortality by M.R.R. Lopez. If you want to read along or support the channel, you can find the book on Amazon and Kindle. Keep in mind, I am an independent author, narrator, and illustrator. I don't have the budget for the big box stuff. Things will be a little bit rough, but still good. And I thank you so much for your support. This is fun. This is a work of passion and love. Lots of TLC. There's not going to be any perfection. This isn't fine arts. It's all cliche. It's all been done before. But it's rock and roll. And you're invited to the party. In this day and age, there are so many people who can read, but there are very few people who have time to read. And this way, you can enjoy the story as you drive, as you're cooking, as you rest. That's the original way the story was supposed to be. It was supposed to be spoken. It was supposed to be around the campfire when everyone's winding down and settling down for the night. It was supposed to be about the great fish that got away. It was supposed to be about Hercules or about David and Goliath. It was supposed to be spoken. And that's the real root of the story. Now with the YouTube and other platforms, we can recreate that so much easier because if we have a story, we can share it directly to you. It's not confined to a couple of gatekeepers. It used to be if you had music, you'd have to go through record companies. If you had a book, you had to go through the publishers, and they would distribute it for you. But now it's person to person, storyteller to the audience, sitting right across the campfire, face to face. And I want to create that, and I want it to be free, and at the same time I want to contribute to local businesses and the community. This is the tribe that we live in, and so if, as a writer, as a storyteller, in this modern age, I want to find a way not to beg people to buy the book, but to give back to the community, whether it's the local hot dog stand, the mom and pop shop. If you have a business and you want to advertise, I'm a channel that's looking for that, and if you want to support me, I'll support you. And as we all gather around, everybody eats. I don't want this story, this art, to be locked up in a museum. I want it to live, I want it to be free, I want it to be heard, and I want it to be enjoyed. And I hope you come with me in this adventure. And if you want to support the channel, share this. It means more to me that the story is heard than me to peddle a book, to sell a book. Your time, your eyes, your ears are my reward, and that's means the most to me. And no matter what you're going through, I hope this can be something that that you can enjoy, whether you're sick or you're healthy, whether things are going well or not. We can all come together, we can all listen to music, and we can all hear a story. Anyways, that's the end of that rant. What you really want to hear is Chapter 5, In the Dark, coming next.